Coming up on Network Africa, 6 Zimbabwean armed robbers escaped from custody in South Africa. Public sector workers in South Africa demand wage increase. Plus, death toll from tropical cyclone Freddy in Malawi rises to 99. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Joke Rogers here in Lagos. 6 Zimbabweans, all suspected armed robbers, have escaped from custody while on transit from their accomplices engaged South African police in a shootout. In a statement, South African police say they launched a manhunt for the heavily armed suspects who freed the 6 prisoners during the gunfight. The daring attack was staged some 120 kilometers south of Beitbridge, a border town near Zimbabwe. South African police have advised people not to approach the suspects under any circumstances as they are considered dangerous, but must instead call the police. Zimbabwe has the largest migrant population in South Africa as its nationals continue to run away from the political and economic woes at home. The South African government has been cracking down on foreign nationals, especially Zimbabweans involved in violent crimes. Meanwhile, South Africa's largest public sector workers' union continue to protest outside various hospitals across the country. Protests, including union members in health and education, has run into its second week with heavy law enforcement on display to monitor the rallies. The National Education, Health and Allied Workers Union is demanding a 10% wage increase, while the government has offered 4.7%. According to the military, medical personnel were deployed to several public hospitals to mitigate the consequences of a strike that the government says has caused several deaths. South African Health Minister Joe Phala said at least 4 patients had died, which can be directly attributed to the strike. Let's go more on this. Joining me now is our South Africa Bureau Chief, Betty Dibia. Hi, Betty. What can you tell us about...
Hello, good to see you.
It's great to see you. What can you tell us about the armed robbers who escaped?
Well, we often get these kinds of things where I think in this particular case, there was an ambush of the police or those who were carrying the prisoners. But we often see these situations, but at the end of the day, with the manhunt, they often get caught and put back in prison. But there isn't too much detail into what exactly happened. But we often get this situation. Sometimes it starts at the courts where the gun of one of the prison officials or the police usually accompany the prison officials, and then probably a gun is pulled, or their friends from outside ambush the police one way or another and then free them. But most of the time they're often caught again and then they're back in prison.
Okay, moving away from that, some of the more bigger issues in South Africa is the protest by public sector workers because of the wage increase that they're demanding. They want 10%. The government is offering 4.7%, such a huge gap from their expectations. Give us an update on this protest that has now entered its second week, I believe.
Well, as far as the update is, before I go into a bit of a background for this issue, yesterday the Labour Court granted the government or the Department of Health an interdict demanding that the essential workers return to work immediately. The department gave them up until this morning. And then the labor union went to court to appeal that, but the court upheld the initial judgment that they should go back to work. So as at today, most of the provinces They have the essential workers. Now, there was a problem determining who the essential workers are. Probably the nurses. That's not the only nursing association. You have other associations as well. So they have been ordered by their unions to go back to work. And you have a sprinkling of non-essential workers, because now you have, I know they keep insisting that it's public sector workers who are on strike. So you have some associations that support them. So you have probably deployees from Home Affairs Department that give birth certificates and all that work along with the members of this association who are on strike. So the major workers, the essential workers, the nurses, have gone back to work. And I know a province like KwaZulu-Natal, they insisted that they will be they insisted that they will continue with the strike. So security has been beefed up. But in some of the hospitals that they wanted to go back to, at a particular case, many of the workers were not allowed, probably because the authorities are afraid of what might happen within those institutions. But the Army Medical Corps have been deployed to some of the hospitals, and then you have a few trucks and a few number of soldiers, guarding some of these hospitals. These visuals that you're showing are actually from yesterday, so things are much calmer now at many of the institutions. But the non-essential workers are the ones who are hanging around, not exactly working. But the unions have instructed their members, the essential workers, to go back to work. Right, while they will continue fighting.
Yeah, so let's see, I talked about the gap in the, offer and the demand, 4.7 to 10%. In view of, the issues that have occurred, the people that have died, the work, the work that's still not being done, what's the government saying? Are they going to budge? Are they going to increase their offer? Or will the unions, take what they can get at the end of the day?
Well, I guess they will have to continue talking. This wage increase demand, it stems from 2018. There was an agreement where you have 2018, 2019, 2019, 2020, 2020, 2021. So government had paid what was agreed for the first two installments. That's 2018, 2019, 2019, 2020. Then government reneged on the 2020, 2021. And there was a court ruling, the Constitutional Court, saying that government pulled back because they complained of budgetary restraints. Remember, 2020, we had COVID. So government had to spend a lot. But these people are insisting on the money. And a Constitutional Court, that's the apex court, had ruled that the Department of Public Sector and Administration that the deal was not even right in the first place, because that department, which covers these people, didn't do the required consultation and approval from Treasury. Remember, Treasury gives the money that will be used. But then again, the PPA scandals, the corruption that happened during COVID did not help matters. So they said, if you can do this, then you'll be able to pay us the money that we have. But then again, some of the labor experts that we've spoken to are saying, look, at the end of the day, these people go to the same markets that everybody is going to. That apart from even the 10% and the 4.7 that the government is offering, they should be able to find a way to pay them, improve their working conditions, not just at the hospitals, the police, the teacher, the educators, as well in the public sector. All that will go a long way in calming people down beyond that deal that they're talking about. So they're insisting on their 10%. Government is saying 4.7. We don't know what continued dialogue, but then again, they will still have to keep talking. And the labor leaders have already said it too. They will continue their collective bargaining, collective negotiation to ensure that the working conditions and what they're paid it's a lot better. It's much, much better than it is. Remember, there is the vacancy rate at that lower level, especially the public sector is quite high because of situations like this. And they're hoping that compared to the upper level, which is more bloated, and those ones earn much more. So you see the reason why they say they will continue fighting and continue talking to ensure that their working conditions, the remuneration that they get is much better.
Yes, so most times in Nigeria and other African countries, we see all these strike actions, and then it becomes like a labor dispute, a court order or a court.
It is a labor dispute.
Yes, then the court comes in. Now the court has said that they did not negotiate the right way. Are the unions considering this in their strike, or the continuing negotiation you say that they're working on? Is it going to consider what the court is saying?
Your audio is not so good, but that ruling was from last year. It was March, like a year ago, March 2022. But they're continuing with their demands for what was agreed in 2018. So the strike is continuing up to a point. Remember, I said the non-essential workers, when they determine in some areas they're not working. In some areas, but the intimidation of people going to work, which we saw in the first week of this strike action, is not really happening. But the worry is in a place like KwaZulu-Natal, where security has been beefed up because of expected violence and things like that. But they say they will continue talking with the right through the right channels to ensure that what they're demanding, they get it, because they believe that the government can, and that they have a right to have much better working conditions than they're having at the moment.
Right, certainly our South Africa Bureau Chief, Bessie Dibia, giving us an update from those two issues today.
Thank you so much, okay.
Let's move on. The death toll in Malawi from Tropical Storm Freddy has risen to 190, with 85 deaths recorded. The country is struggling to contain the effects of the storm, which has wreaked devastation, particularly in 10 of the country's southern regions. Now, heavy rains accompanied by strong winds have destroyed houses, washed away roads and bridges, flattened crop fields, and disrupted power generation, with most parts experiencing prolonged blackouts. The main referral hospital says it's overwhelmed by the sheer number of bodies it's receiving. The Malawi government has declared a state of national disaster in the most affected districts. Meanwhile, volcanologists say they have observed a glow at the top of Nyamulagira volcano in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. The mountain last major eruption was in 2011, its biggest eruption in 100 years. It's located right in the middle of Virunga National Park, which is also home to endangered mountain gorillas. According to UN estimates, there are currently no threats to the city of Goma, where around 670,000 people live. But volcanic ash and strands of cooled lava could be blown by wind into inhabited areas. Residents have been advised to keep calm and go about their businesses freely. Residents have also been urged to wash vegetables and use stored water, while airlines have been told to consider the wind direction when flying over the Virunga region. Still to come on the program. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris plans to visit Ghana, Tanzania, and Zambia, just as U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is due to visit Ethiopia. Nigeria is not on their agenda. Details in a moment. Welcome back to the program. Millions in the Greater Horn of Africa are facing acute hunger as the region struggles with one of the worst droughts in recent decades. The World Health Organization says Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, South Sudan, and Uganda are particularly affected by the dire food insecurity and health crisis.
We are seeing serious surge in disease outbreaks and the highest number of malnourished children in years. And all this against the backdrop of deteriorating outlook in terms of food insecurity. Almost 12 million children under the age of 5 are projected to be malnourished in this region. This is a region that hosts a large number of refugees, has accumulated millions of IDPs over the years, but on top of that, today we see more than 2 million drought-induced displaced. So these are really people who've left their homes looking for water, for humanitarian assistance. The frequency of these disease outbreaks can be directly linked to these extreme weather events and to climate change. I personally want to witness, I've been working on and off in this region for almost 25 years now. And in terms of accumulated emergencies, this is as bad as I've ever seen it. Malnutrition in combination with disease are often a deadly cocktail. You know, for example, a malnourished child that gets measles is much more likely to die. Continued scale up of humanitarian.
Elsewhere, Eritrean President Isaias Afwerki has urged Sudan to be wary of foreign meddling and solve their problems by themselves. He made the comments during talks in Asmara with the deputy head of Sudan's ruling Transitional Sovereign Council, Mohamed Hamdan, who made a one-day visit to the country. The president also called on the Sudanese army to keep off politics. Eritrea is believed to be back in efforts to solve the political crisis in Sudan that has persisted since the October 2021 coup. And Tunisia has sworn in a new parliament, with the opposition coalition refusing to recognize its legitimacy. Only state media were allowed to cover the opening session. Independent journalists were denied access. A spokeswoman for Tunisia's Journalists Union said what was happening was rather dangerous. The parliament was elected on a turnout of just over 11% after a new constitution was passed, granting its author, President Said, sweeping powers. Mr. Said dissolved the previous elected parliament 2 years ago in a move described by critics as a coup. To diplomatic relations now, where U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris plans to visit 3 African states in what will be her first trip to the continent since she took office more than 2 years ago. She's expected to visit Ghana, Tanzania, and Zambia. Her press secretary, Kirsten Allen, said in a statement that the Vice President's visit to Ghana, Tanzania, and Zambia from the 25th of March to the 2nd of April will focus on efforts to expand access to the digital economy, support climate adaptation and resilience, and strengthen business ties and investment. She adds that the Vice President's trip will strengthen the United States partnerships throughout Africa and advance the shared effort on security and economic prosperity. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is traveling to Africa for a 2-nation tour, the latest in a series of visits to the continent by top American officials. Mr. Blinken's visit to the 2 countries this week will focus on security, a ravaging drought, and the jihadist threat in the Sahel region. He will be in Ethiopia on Wednesday to discuss the implementation of the peace deal signed between the government and rebel groups following a 2-year bloody war. Ethiopia is battling the aftermath of the fighting that displaced tens of thousands and the effects of the worst droughts in the Horn of Africa region in decades. He will then visit Niger, the first by a U.S. Secretary of State, and will help shore up efforts to counter the expansion of jihadist groups in the Sahel. His visit to Africa follows that of U.S. First Lady Jill Biden, who last month visited Namibia and Kenya. Let's get more on this. Our Washington, D.C. correspondent, Marianne Bird, joins us now from Washington. Hello, Maria.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, so Jill Biden was in Africa. She visited Kenya and Namibia. Now, Vice President Kamala Harris is set to visit Ghana, Tanzania, and Zambia. Why is Nigeria excluded from this?
Well, I don't think this is an intentional exclusion of any countries within Africa. I think that really what this is about is a strategy. I think that the U.S. has become very serious and focused. One thing that we all observed that was different than years past, the U.S.-Africa Summit, I think, was the most highly anticipated, the first large summit in the U.S. since COVID, and one that most of the major players in the United States, from the president all the way through, were very committed and dedicated in working to find ways to better partner with Africa. So I think this is more of a strategy focus, more so than an exclusion. I think that at this time, we all know that the U.S. and Nigeria have had long-time economic relationships. We also know that many of the leaders within the Biden administration are from Nigeria. For example, our U.S. Deputy Secretary of Treasury, many of the General Counsel, our UN representative, Karen Thomas Greenfield, is a long-term ambassador with Nigeria, a long-term relationship there. And so I think that the relationship and the collaboration between the U.S. and Nigeria has been one that's been worked on, and I know the collaboration is there moving forward in the future. But I think at this time, the U.S. is looking strategically at where we have not been, where there are some efforts being made. Obviously, they're trying to position themselves with Russia and China. They see the growth that's happening with those two countries in the continent. And so I think that's where the U.S. is trying to make its focus over this next visit by the Vice President and the Secretary of State.
So how well do you think this trip by Kamala Harris will serve as a boost of relationship with the African countries? There's no question that it will boost some, but there are competitors like Russia and China who have already made inroads into the region.
Yes, I think that her hope is that she can come in and find ways to partner not only with the government, with private partners as well. I think that the climate control and energy is a huge concern for the U.S. I mean, we are suffering greatly with climate challenges, and we know that the continent has done a lot of work in that area. We also know that energy is a major challenge for the U.S. We know oil reserves are a challenge. And so there's a lot of conversations that I think the U.S., to be very honest, believes are a little bit behind on. And I think that they're really trying to put their best foot forward to have those conversations, build those business relationships, but ultimately build partnerships that are really about impacting the global economy and the global environment as well.
Right, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Linda Thomas-Greenfield visited earlier this year. Secretary of State Antony Blinken will travel to Ethiopia and Niger this week, and President Joe Biden is expected to visit the continent later this year. So why is Africa the focus here? What's the significance of these trips?
I think that Africa was on the verge of being the focus during the Obama administration. I think that the U.S. Understands that when you talk about partnerships, when you talk about where the movement of the world is, you have to be very much inclusive and partnering with the continent. I think that the U.S. has been pushed for some time now to find ways to better partner. And I think that now the U.S. is at a prime time to do that. So I think this is really about timing. Why now? As you mentioned before, Secretary Blinken is going to Ethiopia and Nigeria. His focus is more going to be humanitarian and security focused. We also know the U.S. has dealt with security challenges. So I think that there's an exchange of knowledge, an exchange of economics, of business, and an exchange of how to address some of the very vast climate change issues that the entire world is facing.
The U.S. Vice President had visited as a young girl when visiting her maternal grandfather. Well, that was a long time ago in the 1960s, according to the Los Angeles Times. Is it safe to say her trip may also sort of feel like a homecoming?
I think the Vice President has a very soft heart for her lineage and for where she's from, just due to some of the very dynamics of her upbringing. And so I do think you will probably find that whether or not she has a touching moment or whether or not she feels at homecoming, I do think that she will definitely reflect on who she is and the various dynamics that exist within her own family lineage. So I think that she will definitely share those moments while there.
Well, Maria, thank you so much for updates on that. Well, that's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Joke Rogers. Bye for now.